There has been damage to the USS Abraham Lincoln. Say that aloud. Allow it to land? Because those 6 words sum up the most significant military development since the Second World War was ended by the atomic bomb. Not in terms of immediate tactical harm or losses, but rather in terms of the implications for the structure of American global hegemony that has structured the military and political order of the globe for 8 decades. In battle, the U.S. Navy aircraft carrier sustained significant damage. On a Tuesday morning, the IRGC used drones and rockets in the Persian Gulf. Before the internet, the jet age, nuclear weapons, and the entire post-war order that America created, upheld, and enforced with the precise, believable, and uncontested threat that if you cross a line, a carrier strike group will arrive on your horizon, and the conversation ends. An American aircraft carrier was last hit in combat in 1945. The threat has just evolved. Not finished, but altered in such a way that every naval officer, defense minister, enemy, ally, and nation that has ever changed its course due to a carrier in the area is recalculating this morning due to fresh inputs. Inputs that have not been included in any defense evaluation, wargame, or alliance commitment agreement since 1945. What occurs if the carrier is struck? We're going to find out. Allow me to explain what an aircraft carrier is. Not the crew numbers, not the aircraft complement, not the tonnage, and not the statistics. What it is and how American power is organized. The American promise is embodied in the aircraft carrier. The carrier is what gives adversaries credibility when America tells an ally, "We will defend you." When America warns an enemy, "Do not cross this line," the line is given weight by the carrier. With 100,000 tons of steel, aviation fuel, ordnance, and the world's most powerful air wing, it can project American military might into waterways that are not part of American territory and enforce American policies at distances that are inaccessible to land-based forces. They are 11 in number. 11 nuclear-powered aircraft carriers are in service with the United States. No other nation has more than 2. The majority run at 0. The physical advantage that transforms American dominance from merely continental to truly global is the carrier fleet. It is what sets the U.S. military apart from all others on the planet. Among the 11 is the USS Abraham Lincoln. It was struck. There are 5,000 people on that ship before we proceed, before the doctrine, the deterrent, and the geopolitical ramifications. As part of an operation their nation launched on a platform that every aspect of American military training doctrine and institutional culture told them was the safest, most powerful, and most defended position in the American force posture, 5,000 American sailors, aviators, and officers went to work on the USS Abraham Lincoln. The carrier serves as more than just a platform for armaments. It's a floating metropolis with its own power plant, hospital, and court system, as well as a society of people who work, eat, sleep, and maintain the most intricate military apparatus ever constructed by humans. This morning, that city was struck. Damage control teams that have been trained for this exact circumstance are currently fighting the fires that are raging on the flight deck of the Abraham Lincoln, in its hangars, in whichever compartments the Iranian strikes penetrated. American sailors with hoses and foam, as well as the particular discipline of life and death professionalism that the Navy has included into its damage control doctrine since it lost carriers at Midway in the Coral Sea and discovered what happens when fires reach the ordnance. While this script is being read, they are fighting for their ship. The strategic and human aspects of this attack are intertwined. Because the carrier serves as a deterrent for the 5,000 passengers on the Abraham Lincoln, it is inextricably linked to it. Not the people, not the missiles, nor the steel. The readiness of American service members to be present, vulnerable, and present in the theater, so that the threat is actual and the commitment is tangible rather than theoretical, has always been the foundation of the American guarantee's legitimacy. They were in the theater. They were discovered by Iran. Now, comprehend the IRGC's approach, as it is just as important as the outcome. And every fleet on the planet that reads the reports this morning will be forced to rethink naval policy. The IRGC combined the employment of drones and missiles, a well-planned striking package. Drones provide the low-altitude, low-radar cross-section vector that takes advantage of the engagement windows created by ballistic missile intercepts, while ballistic missiles provide the high-altitude, high-speed vector that compels the carrier's Aegis air defense system to engage. The drones perform poorly, while the ballistic missile threat is processed by the CIWS and regular missile interceptors. The following missile volley is already in the air, while the drone's swarm signatures are being managed by the electronic warfare systems. Throughout this fight, Iran has been honing the same multi-vector attack architecture against ground-based air defense. The most guarded mobile platform in naval warfare history was subject to the same reasoning that destroyed 3 THAAD radars, the FPS-132 and the building in the Hyatt and Victoria base. It was successful. The most advanced shipboard air defense architecture ever used is the Aegis combat system on a Nimitz-class carrier strike group. the entire carrier strike group, electronic warfare suites, SPY-1 radar, standard missile interceptors, CIWS as the last line, escorts, cruisers, and destroyers all work together as an integrated air defense network to defend the carrier at the center against precisely the type of multi-vector attack Iran just carried out. Iran, nevertheless, carried it out. What that means for the 11 carriers is as follows. The core operational premise of the American military's carrier-based power projection doctrine is that the carrier is the indispensable focal point of any force it employs. A particular survivability hypothesis informs the design of carriers. Layered defense is the theory. Aircraft from the air wing carrier engage the threat at its greatest range of hundreds of miles. The strike group's long-range surface-to-air missiles engage anything that passes through the air wing. What gets through the missiles is engaged by close-in weapon systems. According to the hypothesis, anything that passes through the CIWS was never intended to. The layers were meant to be adequate. The calculations were meant to be accurate. Iran contributed enough vectors to the challenge to identify the layer seams. For 30 years, every carrier program office at the Pentagon has included that terrifying scenario in their confidential threat assessments, the organized onslaught against saturation. Before all of the interceptors reach their targets, the layered defense will be overwhelmed by enough missiles from enough angles at enough altitude bands with enough drone supplements, the situation that could potentially be detrimental to a carrier. Everyone hoped that the situation would stay theoretical. This morning, it wasn't theoretical. There was significant damage to the USS Abraham Lincoln. Not sunk, but seriously damaged. The distinction is important or irrelevant. It matters because the crew is still engaged in combat and the carrier is still floating. Furthermore, since the Second World War, the U.S. Navy has not lost a ship of this magnitude. It makes no difference, since the operational strategic deterrence myth of the invulnerable carrier is no more resilient to serious damage than it is to sinking. The deterrence is the myth. The myth has been disproved. Let's now examine what naval history reveals regarding the definition of a hit carrier. Because the United States has been here before, and the events that followed created the modern world as a whole. At the Battle of Coral Sea in May 1942, the USS Yorktown sustained significant damage. According to the Navy, repairs would take 90 days. After the Navy fixed it in 72 hours at Pearl Harbor, it was sent back into battle at Midway, where it was mortally struck once more and sank. In the battle that changed the course of the Pacific War, Yorktown's presence at Midway, damaged and engaged in combat, was the difference between victory and defeat. America paid a heavy price for its loss. Japan lost everything as a result of its reluctance to remain in port. In March 1945, the USS Franklin was struck off the coast of Japan. In one strike, 800 men were slain. The ship came dangerously close to sinking. It was rescued by the crew's valiant damage control efforts, limped 12,000 meters back to New York on its own, and never engaged in combat again. It was a marvel of seamanship that it survived. Its time in fighting was over. In a typical naval conflict, both of the carriers were struck by conventional aircraft. A regional power employing 2 decades of honed anti-access tactics fired synchronized drone swarms and hypersonic missiles, but neither was struck. In a time when satellite photos would be taken, instantly transmitted, reviewed in Beijing and Moscow before the flames were put out, and processed by financial markets that would then adjust oil prices, neither was affected. In 2026, the Abraham Lincoln was struck. The deterrence recalculation is not taking place over weeks and months like it did after Coral Sea and Midway, because the implications spread at the speed of information and have already reached every significant capital. It is currently taking place in real time during the same hours as the damage control personnel are battling the fires. In real time, the myth is disproved. Take a look at the 10 carriers that are not Abraham Lincoln. This morning, all U.S. Navy carrier strike group commanders awoke to a report that alters their threat assessment, tactical doctrine, operational planning, and their honest private calculation of survivability in a high-intensity conflict against an adversary with the missile and drone inventory that Iran has displayed throughout this conflict. In light of what the IRGC did to the Abraham Lincoln this morning, it is necessary to review the doctrine they trained on, the layered defense that the simulations validated, and the war games that resulted in the carrier strike group employment manuals that every carrier commander executes from. This will not be made public by the Navy. It will state that the carrier is still in operation. It will state that the crew gave a really professional performance. It will state that the Aegis system engaged the threat and carried out its intended function. It will state that the carrier is still a competent fighting platform and that the remaining damage is being evaluated. That could all be true. The myth is not addressed in any way. Invulnerability was the myth. It was a fallacy that you couldn't hit our carrier. 30 years of American naval diplomacy were built upon the fiction. Because carriers are more convincing than gunboats, 30 years of gunboat diplomacy were conducted without gunboats. Because the carrier on the horizon signaled a degree of military consequence they were unwilling to face. Enemies changed their tactics for 30 years. Iran had to deal with it. Iran concealed it. Now see how this knowledge is used by every nation in the globe that has ever changed its behavior, because to a carrier, China, Beijing has been constructing its denial of access area architecture, its carrier killer ballistic missiles, DF-21D and DF-26. It swarms with drones, the doctrine of coordinated multi-vector attacks, especially in regard to the carrier issue. In particular, since Chinese military strategists recognized the carrier as the focal point of American power projection in the Pacific and developed a force to counter it. For the past 20 years, China has been manipulating this result. This morning, China observed Iran carrying out the plan China had created against an actual American carrier. China recently received their proof of concept. The carrier killer is the name given to the DF-21D. It has never been used in battle against a carrier. Iran's drones and missiles were not the DF-21D, but they did what the DF-21D was intended to do. They discovered the multi-layer protection and the seams. They broke through the Aegis defense. They struck the ship. Taiwan is keeping an eye on this. Japan is keeping an eye on this. South Korea is keeping an eye on this. Watching the damage reports on the USS Abraham Lincoln, every American ally in the Pacific whose security depends on the credible deterrence of American carrier power in disputed areas is reevaluating the value of American guarantees in the particular case when China chooses to test them. Russia is observing. This assessment does not take into account Russia's only carrier, Admiral Knatsov, which is always in disrepair. Russia's evaluation of U.S. naval might in the Baltic, Mediterranean, and waters along NATO's eastern flank is pertinent. Russia is making judgments about what Russian hypersonic missiles and drone swarms could do against American naval forces in the European theater after witnessing a foe with a fraction of Chinese military expertise seriously harm an American carrier. North Korea, all non-state actors, and all regional powers that have been discouraged by the carrier's presence are now weighing the consequences of its proven vulnerability. Iran provided both of them with the data they required for free and real time in a live combat environment that no exercise or simulation can duplicate. This morning, the 11-carrier deterrent design was modified. This morning, the 11-carrier deterrent design was modified. Watch Congress now, as the carrier hit is more than simply a military and geopolitical incident. The United States Navy was hit by Iran as an aircraft carrier this morning. And it is a domestic political explosion that is exploding in real time on the Senate and House floors, in every television studio, in every social media feed, and in every kitchen table conversation across the nation. Since 67 Americans lost their lives in Kuwait, Congress has increased its pressure. Since the destruction of Victoria Base, the tanker's retreat to Europe, the public disclosure of the Sovereign Wealth Fund withdrawal talks, the darkening of the Thiad radars in 3 countries, and the pressure for authorization, accountability, a definition of objectives, and clear answers to the question that no administration official has provided since the first B-2 took off. What is the plan, and when will it be finished? That pressure becomes a crisis due to the carrier hit. Powers of war. The legislative branch's oversight procedures over a military campaign that has resulted in a severely damaged aircraft carrier, 67 dead paratroopers, destroyed American bases from Baghdad to Kuwait, and an enemy that continues to launch 35 waves of strategic missiles at American allies. This morning, residents are calling congressional offices and phones with questions that cannot be postponed due to the carrier attack. Is there a war going on? An actual conflict. A conflict in which our Navy battles fires on the flight deck of the world's most powerful ship, our aircraft carriers are hit, our soldiers perish, and our bases are destroyed. Yes, that is the response. Since Al-Wad al-Sadiq IV's first wave, that has been the solution. The point at which no one can contest the answer is known as the carrier hit. The government is overseeing a war against an enemy that has now seriously damaged an American aircraft carrier, a conflict that Congress does not explicitly approve. The War Powers Resolution, which mandates legislative approval within 60 days following the deployment of forces to hostilities, provides the constitutional and legal framework for such circumstance. A congressional chamber full of members who will stand in front of cameras today and make statements that limit the administration's options is the political backdrop for that scenario. Iran hit the carrier to generate this as well, regardless of the administration's desire to limit them. Watch what Washington does now that a deal offer and a seriously damaged carrier are both on the table at the same time. The deal was offered by Iran. Already, the agreement offer was the most difficult choice of the conflict. Iran will survive if you accept it. Rejected, the window closes, the 80-second advances, and the elimination tactic takes effect. The Abraham Lincoln was then struck. The deal calculation is concurrently altered in 2 ways by the carrier being hit. First, it puts more pressure on Washington to accept the agreement. An extremely damaged carrier is a high-level political incident. The American public, the American Congress, and the American media landscape will interpret this image as the final representation of this fight. More than the 67 dead in Kuwait, the destroyed Victoria base, or the tankers fleeing to Europe, it is the image that transforms the domestic political landscape surrounding the war. A strike on an aircraft carrier in the Persian Gulf is not a tale about international policy. The story is American. The USS Cole, Pearl Harbor, and every instance in which the American military's presumed invulnerability was put to the test by a genuine attack, all weigh heavily on the nation's consciousness. The second direction, the pressure to reject the deal and take all necessary steps to treat the carrier hit as a threshold event that necessitates an overwhelming, disproportionate, and final response that eliminates Iran's ability to ever again threaten an American naval asset in any theater. In order to take advantage of the military window that the burning tunnels opened, the arrival of the 82nd Dacer was postponed until after that window expires, in order to complete the work before Iran rebuilds and constructs longer-range hypersonic missiles, deeper tunnels, and the next generation of carrier-killing capability. These pressures are genuine. Both have strong political clout. In the same room, both are sensed. Iran intended for this paralysis to result from the carrier hit. It was a planned, intentional attack on the platform whose harm has the greatest political impact in Washington, not an accident or an opportunistic strike against a convenient target. Iran fired at the ship at the exact moment the agreement offer was on the table and the 48-hour window was open, in order to prevent a political crisis within the American decision-making machinery that would have consumed the window. That leads to discussion rather than a decision. Authorization is delayed as a result of congressional demands for accountability. As the military window closes, Iran's tunnels cease to burn, the trapped troops discover ways out, and the reload starts. The government is forced to deal with the political impact at home. Iran struck the carrier after making a deal offer. The agreement is still up for discussion. The carrier continues to burn. America is at the most significant turning point since the end of the Cold War, and the window is still open. This is the appearance of each path, concretely, not abstractly. America accepts the arrangement the following morning. The Abraham Lincoln's fires have been put out. Presence is redefined as the mission of the 82nd Airborne. The B-52s cease their aggressive missions. Through middlemen, a framework for a ceasefire is agreed. Iran will invite Oman, Qatar, or anyone else to the table. As the strait reopens on terms that both parties can consider successful, oil prices decline. Withdrawals from the Sovereign Wealth Fund cease. The Gulf states release their breath. Gas is delivered to Europe prior to winter. Energy stocks in Russia reach a peak and remain stable. Iran's people are declared victorious by the country's ruling council. We engaged in combat with America. We struck their carrier. They approached the table. Deeper rebuilding of the tunnels takes place. The missile program reorganizes. What remains of the nuclear program is used as a negotiation tool by the incoming administration. As China completes its operational planning for Taiwan, the carrier hit serves as a data point for the following 10 years. The deal is rejected by America. The 82nd moves closer to Iranian territory. The B-52s are still in operation. The network of smoldering tunnels is repeatedly struck until it is impossible to free the 250,000 imprisoned soldiers. Before the IRGC can be rebuilt, its missile reload is depleted. The entire window that the GBU-57 opened is traversed. The ability of the Iranian military to endanger the strait, its neighbors, American bases, and carriers, that capacity is reduced to rubble. There is no Wave 36. There is no Wave 37. The reason the strait reopens is not because Iran decided to do so, but rather because the force that was keeping it closed is no longer in place. Oil declines because there is no longer a threat, not because of an agreement. Israel obtains its plan for eradication. Instead of shattering American resolve, the carrier hit strengthened it. For a generation, Iran endures as a state, but not as a military force. Both results are conceivable. They're both in the room. Both are on the table, in addition to the deal offer that Iran timed the carrier strike with the accuracy of a military operation that has been planned for a longer period of time than this conflict has been going on. Carrier invincibility is no longer a myth. The question of what America is, what it does when its carriers are struck, its bases are destroyed, its men are killed, the cost is actual, the window is open, and the choice cannot be postponed. There is no longer a myth to conceal that question, just a decision, and 5,000 sailors battling flames on a Persian Gulf flight deck while the world awaits the answer.